So start.
A very good morning to all the viewers who have joined us through YouTube from different locations of the country and globe. I am Dr. Mahesh Sharma from IIT Jodhpur, along with my INYAS colleague, Dr. Pankaj Kumar from IOSC, Delhi. It is our pleasure and honor to welcome you all in the INSA-INYAS Webinar webinar series. As you all know that we are in lockdown due to COVID-19 and India as a whole is putting lots of efforts to constrain the number of infected people. As a scientist, it is our responsibility to work in this difficult situation and discover the solution of the pandemic. Keeping science on priority is the prime responsibility of a scientist. The Indian National Science Academy was established in 1935 with the objective of promoting science in India and connecting scientific knowledge for the cause of humanity and national welfare. Indian National Young Academy of Science, INYAS, was founded by the INSA Council in December 2014. Vision of INYAS is to promote science education and networking among young scientists. INSA and INYAS both are addressing current pandemic issue through scientific approaches. And in this direction, INSA and INYAS have come together to organize this webinar series to reach out to you to discuss science, including COVID-19. Before we start the webinar today, it is our pleasure to have Professor Chandrima Saha, President INSA, with us to give her opening remarks about this webinar series. Professor Saha, please.
Yes, thank you, Mahesh. A very warm welcome to all of you in this INSA-INYAS webinar. And as you know, we are all going through an unprecedented time when communication is very important, has become very essential and important. But unfortunately, we are unable to interact by being physically present at a meeting in close quarters. While actually we miss that chat over a cup of tea or coffee, online communication has become the norm. So the idea of having webinars designed by INSA and INYAS is basically to reach out to fellows, to the students, and to the general public to talk about the advances, current advances in science. And INSA, as you know, is committed to disseminate information on scientific advances and also participate in the policymaking discussions with academies all over the world. Now, during this period, we have been in touch with actively taking part in discussions with the Inter-Academy Partnership, the Commonwealth Academies, the Asian Academies, and others. So we need to communicate these to the stakeholders. And while to communicate the issues in science, webinars are, as we know, is an effective means. But because of the all-pervasive effect of this COVID-19, our initial webinars will be limited to COVID-19 only, discussion on issues regarding COVID-19. And while COVID-19 is actually causing much suffering, it has also opened up opportunities to do excellent science to protect us from similar events in the future. So these advances also need to be communicated to the various stakeholders. As we emerge to the new world after the COVID-19, we look forward to have our meetings again with personal presence, but webinars are going to stay as an effective means of communication. Lastly, I would like to thank the INYAS members for taking the initiative to start this series. They have actually given their valuable time to structure this, and it is very well appreciated. And so I hope that you will all enjoy this webinar series, and I wish it all a success. And I welcome Professor Shashidhara and thank him for agreeing to give the opening webinar today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Chandrima Saha, for telling our viewers about this webinar series. Now we will start the seminar with short presentation by our guest today, intermixed with questions from we two moderators for about 25 minutes. If you have any questions, please post through YouTube chat box. We will take them up after the first round of discussion. Today, we have with us Professor L.S. Shashidhara. He is a distinguished professor of biology and Dean Research at Ashoka University. Currently, he is on leave from INSA, Pune. For his contribution to basic and applied biology, Professor Shashi is recognized with many national and international awards, including CSIR Technology Award, SS Bhatnagar Prize, and JC Bose National Fellowship. He is the fellow of all three National Science Academies, INSA, NASI, and IS. He is also president of the International Union of Biological Sciences. He was vice president of INSA during 2015 to 2017. In addition, he is serving as a member of various apex committees of Government of India and science and technology organizations. Today in this webinar series, we will talk about science on the pandemic and science through the pandemic. Now, we welcome Professor Shashidhara to start the discussion and put some lights on the topic. Yes, Professor. Your microphone is on mute.
Hello, Mahesh and Pankaj. Thank you very much. And I thank INSA for giving this opportunity. And it's a privilege to be a speaker here, and also, a bit of an anxious that I'm the first speaker and I had to sort of initiate this series. I hope I'll do a good justice and for the trust that Chandrima Shah has, posed on me. Okay, so how do you want to go about, Mahesh?
Thank you, Professor Shashidhara. I would like to discuss that as a biologist with special interests in evolution, how do you perceive this pandemic?
Okay, so it is called as a pandemic because of a variety of social factors. For a biologist, it is just another disease. There are many, many diseases that are caused, by pathogens. It could be bacterial or viral or even, protozoan parasites like malarial parasite. And how do we sort of, perceive this? Obviously, we have to perceive this in the context of the society, in the context of modern civilization. So I'll take you sort of through a bit of biology of the diseases, and then I hope I'll sort of explain, how anybody in the public should perceive this, and so that they can actually be better, knowledgeable to address the problem in their day-to-day life. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll sort of quickly share my screen. Okay, so obviously the fact that you mentioned evolutionary biology, I'm going to start with what Darwin said, right, about evolution. Now, we are product of evolution. Human species are not any different than any other living organism, from bacteria to human. It's just one dot in a long sort of chain of event that happened right since the origin of life on Earth, which is supposed to be around 3.8 billion years ago, right? Now, I'm sure, the audience here are pretty knowledgeable. They don't need a lecture on evolution here, but just for the sake of setting the stage, I'll sort of explain in a couple of sentences, how speciation occur, right? Now, populations continuously evolve, whether there's new species emerge or not. Populations change, right? And how do they change? Because of the increased genetic diversity And this genetic diversity sort of increases for two reasons. One is, of course, mixing of and recombination of the genetic material in the population. And the second one is introduction of new variants simply as a chemical means, because during DNA replication there can be error which introduces new genetic variations, right? And these populations, when they're subjected to natural selections, they change their dynamics. Okay. Now, sometimes or very often, in considering that we have gone through 3.8 billion years of evolution, some of these populations can actually split for a variety of reasons. More often, what is quoted is the geographical isolation. And when they split and they continue to sort of change based on the new genetic variations created as well as the natural selection, and then end up maybe becoming two different species. So human also evolved in the same process as a process of this evolution. And one of the small branches in the tree of evolution, this is the picture that I'm showing, is the tree of eukaryotic life. Now in this tree, if you can see it somewhere at the branch here, there are sort of this great ape, chimpanzee, and then his human. We had a common ancestor, and this common ancestor is not just that we suddenly have acquired some new traits. What we have inherited is everything starting from early the early bacteria and early eukaryotic life, and almost many features of all other organisms, including mammals, right? All mammals have one certain specific set of traits. All primates have a subset of traits which are common to mammals, and then of course human have certain specific traits. Now, among all the traits, one of the traits in the context of what today's topic is, our ability to fight pathogens, right? Now, this host pathogen conflict is also a continuous process, and it's happening all the time. And because the viruses and bacteria, they are larger in number, their replication time or reproduction time is much shorter compared to a human life term. For example, typically our replication time or reproduction time is considered to be 30 to 35 years, whereas every 20 minutes to 1 hour a bacteria can divide and viruses can replicate even much faster, right? So in that context, this struggle goes on between the two, and sometimes the host wins and sometimes the pathogens win, but the presence of pathogen cannot be eradicated from the entire universe, entire Earth, right? Interestingly, some pathogens have evolved to become human specific. There are many examples of that kind, and there are also some pathogens which have actually lost the ability to infect human, right? There are also some examples of that one. I'll not get into the details. There are multiple examples of that. Now, in the context of human speech, particularly amongst us, we are called what are known as modern humans, and we belong to a species called Homo sapiens. And there are many other human species. They existed on Earth, they evolved, and then also became extinct, is simply because they couldn't sort of survive very long in the changing environmental conditions for a variety of reasons, right? But interestingly, there is also a clear evidence that amongst the 3 or 4 different human species, some of them actually existed at the same time. If you look at on this side here, with the cursor I'm showing you here, so as recently as about 30 to 40,000 years ago, there are at least 3 different human species that actually coexisted on Earth, right? And there is some evidence that one of the species, Neanderthalensis, or Neanderthals, what we call, leaving more space for modern humans, right? Again, what would have been our natural history in the context if we didn't have, for example, let's say, space for just one particular human species where other human species also coexist at the same time? Of course, one cannot predict what could have happened. But interestingly, what has happened in evolution, some species or most other species became extinct, only one of them survived. And also, again, people had to think about it in the context of science, that there is also some kind of a possibility exists and empirical evidence still need to be generated, that we modern humans came with some resistance to new diseases, whereas we passed on those infectious diseases to Neanderthals and triggering their extinction, right? Not necessarily that entire Neanderthals became extinct because of one particular disease or a set of diseases. Perhaps at least it must have triggered the extinction of that particular species. So as you can see here, the diseases or host pathogen interactions are pretty dynamic and change the history, in any particular direction. Now, even in the modern cultural, human societies, also there are many examples of how infectious diseases have shaped our history and our culture, right? And I'm sure all of you know about the conquering of Mexico by Spanish people in the 16th century. And one of the reasons they could easily conquer, because the Mexican at that time was actually a very advanced civilization and much larger population compared to the invading Spanish army, is simply because of the spread of the smallpox in the Mexican population, right? Anyway, the short answer to your short question is yes, infectious diseases have shaped our evolution, our history, as well as our cultures.
Yeah, thank you, Sasi, for this fruitful information. Most of us are homebound these days, and this lockdown is impacting the very foundation of science research all over the world. How do you think science will shape after this crisis?
Okay, so again, it's very important that we have to have some historical perspective about life, right? All aspects. It's true for, in history, in all walks of life, right? The historical perspective is very important. One is, in biologically, we are the product of evolution. So the natural history is very important. And every society has its own, other histories, including the cultural histories. It's very important that we are aware of those histories before we can formulate our own opinion about how to deal with any situation, right? So in that context, again, let me share the screen back. Okay, so look at the history of pandemics, right? A disease is called pandemic when it starts spreading, entire world to a larger areas, not restricted to only one small region. And the pandemics have been very common, if you look at from the historical records, right? But a variety of reasons why they are so common. One is, of course, because of the cultural evolution and the beginning of agriculture, the humans started settling in one place, and that increased the population densities. We also started domesticating animals, and we started, cutting the forests and reducing the forest coverage around our own settlements, which also increased our sort of interaction with the wildlife. That is what called human wildlife contacts. And all of these things have actually increased the incidence of new diseases. And those new diseases, because they are new and we do not have an immunity against those new pathogens, invariably they spread very fast. Some of them cause simply some disease, and they may not kill us. And they also spread like measles. They spread really fast. And the ones which actually lead to higher fatality, they are the ones who actually spread slower, and they are the ones which also cause huge damage, particularly in the lives of the people, right? So there are many examples of this, and Spanish flu is more recent, just 100 years ago, which killed close to about 50 million people, right? It's a very large number, and we have not even had 50 million infections. But interestingly, the fact that this novel coronavirus is spreading so fast, in spite of the number of deaths that is being reported in the newspaper every day, it is still a milder version of the coronavirus compared to many deadly pathogens that humanity has experienced earlier in the history. And there are quite a few of them which basically have wiped out tens of millions of people earlier time. Now, the question that you're asking is, how do we deal with it, right? Again, so we have to look at what happened during those times. How did people, dealt with situation when they were facing the pandemic? The first thing is, of course, in the current, because better scientific understanding, better awareness of the historical perspective of these diseases, we should be better judge of what we can do during these times. And we need to be cautious for sure, but there is no need to panic, because it's not the only incident that has happened, and this is not the only time a disease of this kind of happened. Of course, we don't want to succumb to a disease. We want to protect our lives. We want to protect the lives of our family members and our neighborhoods, and in general the entire humanity. So what is that we can do together? Obviously, we also need to know how people were actually handled this in those times, and where they have been successful, where they have not been very successful, right? So particularly in the context of scientists, one of what is our job is to generate more knowledge. So that's where we need to very clearly ensure that we continue to do what we are supposed to do, right? Now, let's just take an example about, because there are so many such pandemics earlier. Let's take one example, or let's say 20th century, around the time when there was the First World War, and around the time when the Spanish flu happened, right? And places like India also had additional calamities such as famines around the same time, in particular in the first half of 20th century. And India also was going through a very intense freedom struggle, and that also sort of with the time when the society was so sort of with so many different types of conflict. So how did the sort of scientists cope with the situation is what one has to worry about, right? So study rather. So you can ask the question, did science, it could be social sciences, art, humanity, all forms of knowledge production. So whether it's sort of pause or a stop in the knowledge production. But if you look at from the historical records, again, none of them actually stopped. Poetry, prose, essays, everything was written. There are some landmark, poetry and prose came in the early 20th century, and even during the wars or during the Spanish flu or any such kind of pandemic. I mean, as scientists, we can list many landmark discoveries that happened around that time. For example, Einstein's work or Arthur Eddington's, it's actually a successful international collaboration. He's sort of validating one of the Einstein's predictions. And then C.V. Raman's work, right, in India, or Niels Bohr's work, or DNA, some of the early work on DNA as a genetic material and composition of the DNA, chemical composition of DNA. All of these things happen during those kind of difficult times in the society. As you can make out, science actually never stopped, right? And as you know, when we list some of these discoveries are not spontaneous, right? These discoveries happen only when there is a continuous, work that's going on, when there is a continuous exchange of information between scientists and continuous thinking about science. That means they were basically, when they're living in difficult times, they were not so much, panicking and stop thinking about science. Unless they were thinking about science, they would not have come with these kind of a series of discoveries. So, again, the more close to biomedical research, the whole insulin story, its discovery, its isolation, identifying insulin as a therapy for diabetes, all this happened around the same time between 1915 to 25, about 10 years time, which is actually one of the most difficult times in Europe around that time. So again, the knowledge continued to be produced even all through these pandemics. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been where we are today if people had paused or stopped doing what they were doing. So that's again, a long answer to a short question.
Very well described, Sasi. Further, I wish to discuss that common perception among today's scientific community is that basic science is losing its sheen with tremendous opportunities in applied utility-driven fields. But the current COVID-19 crisis highlights that we should never forget the basic curiosity-driven sciences like virology. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, see, the technology is modern technology, right? Right from 20th century. Much of the technological developments were based on the work that is done in the basic science, right? While science and technology can be separated, you can still have a technological breakthrough without understanding the science behind it. It happened, right from the, when the agriculture started about 10 to 12,000 years ago, and to, until as recently as 19th century. But much of the technological developments in 20th century and 21st century all dependent on the knowledge generated by the basic scientist, right? And also there's always a collaboration between basic scientists and technocrats in developing new technology. Whether it's for biomedical research, it could be drug or vaccine, or developing a new ventilator. Everybody's talking about ventilator in this pandemic, right? Or any aspect, right? And that's why basic science need to be continued, and we should not stop doing it, even for this for the current pandemic itself, right? Now, we know so much about this coronavirus, novel coronavirus. We can diagnose. We are now diagnosing, millions of people across the world, and we are close to developing new drugs and vaccines. It's all clear indication that the basic science has advanced so much in addressing this pandemic compared to any time in the history of humanity, right? Now, again, it's a direct involvement of basic scientists. In India itself, now almost every basic biology labs which have a good infrastructure, whether it is the institutes of DBT or Institute of DST or Institute of MHRD like ISERs and IITs, have stepped in to actually developing diagnostic kits, doing testing, as well as developing some serological tests by looking at the antibodies. They're also doing some research on this virus. All have been fast tracking it, right? So without a strong foundation in basic science, it would not have been possible. Now, what else one could do, right? Well, some people can actually directly participate related to addressing this current pandemic. Some people can actually think and use this as an opportunity, because there is so much awareness among the people about this pandemic, and so much people are worried about that, what may happen in future, if more and more such diseases come. There's also a time when basic scientists, particularly biologists, which actually require interdisciplinary approaches, to start thinking, what else we can do, rather than stop working on it, worried about the current pandemic, about understanding the zoonotic disease, the diseases which come from other animals, right? Now, we also have to think about that, everybody is talking about in the current pandemic, one of the positive things that has come out of this lockdown is the pollution has come down, right? And your air is pure, what you're breathing, your water is pure in the river, and people are talking about a lot. And maybe there is some change to the climate change too, right? But it may not make a big impact if you go back to our so-called, the time of the before the pandemic, and start emitting the same amount of fuel to the carbon to the atmosphere. But still, one can start asking questions and working on, for example, what's the role of climate change on the prevalence of zoonotic disease? Because we have a series of these kind of epidemics and pandemic in the last 15, 20 years. And although this one is the largest so far, right? And what's the correlation to the, the loss of biodiversity and, and such kind of things? One can ask the question, are there any reservoirs of these viruses in the forest? And because the forest is shrinking, we have cut so much of forest. And because wild animals are congregating in smaller places, and that, is it that accelerating the evolution of those viruses, right? And which basically increase the incidence of new pandemics. So these are the kind of questions one can ask, start working, and for which you need, basic scientists. You need biologists, you need computational, scientists, we need physicists, chemists, almost every, discipline scientist we need for this kind of work.
Thank you, Shashi, for your valuable inputs. Basic sciences are very important, and we should motivate our young generation towards it. Currently, most of the basic research labs are shut due to lockdown. How do you see their future in terms of funding and course correction needed to be done by basic science researcher?
Oh, so funding is always a big question, whether it is during the pandemic or outside the pandemic, before or after. These are the kind of questions that are always difficult to address. But anyway, because the societal dynamics about how science is funded uh, is very different. Sometimes because of the war, you get more funding, or sometimes because of the current pandemic. Definitely, there is going to be more funding for biomedical research, if not for all, domains of the basic science. Sometimes, for a number of reasons, basic science will get some additional funding. Uh, Now, coming to, maybe I'll just, one thing we'll have to worry about, is mentioned about young scientists. Again, the reason I keep saying about from the historical perspective is the basic science already has a very, very strong foundation, right? The entire 21st century is the century of science and technology, and this would not have been possible without having a strong foundation in basic science. We're talking about artificial intelligence or machine learning or robotics. All of these things is possible because of the foundation in basic science. The lockdown is somewhat temporary. I know we are, there is a stress, there's anxiety, but 2 to 3 months of lockdown should not sort of wouldn't damage the strong foundation of the basic science, right? And if we feel some kind of helpless, right? Feeling of helplessness, if our young scientists and students, and if they don't pick up the thread after the pandemic, right? And it's very difficult for them to contribute substantially to science after this, right? Like maybe it takes a year before we start, resuming our work in a normal way, right? That 1 year is a too short a time in the history of humanity. Forget about the rest of the history of Earth and talk about just the history of a nation, right? 1 year is hardly anything. If we don't do enough and there is a discontinuity in the knowledge production, the future will blame us, right? The future will be not as good as what we are. We are still better off even during this pandemic, is simply because of the way the science has developed. Now, what is that young scientist and could do is to prepare themselves better scientists, so that funding. You keep asking this question, funding, right? The funding comes when you send good proposal, right? One of the things which all funding agency keep saying, that you give us the good proposal, we'll fund you, right? Now, many people say that my projects are not getting funded. So to what extent is because of the good proposal versus lack of money? Very often it is not lack of money, it is the absence of good proposals, right? And this is the time to prepare, to write the good proposals. Then very often, I'm many of us are in very different committees of the funding agencies. We can clearly see that there is a mad rush to generate results and publish, and in the process, many times the proposals won't talk about what is the question that you're asking, what is your methodology, what is your hypothesis, and what if your hypothesis turn out to be false, right? And what are the ways you have thinking about your science, right? All of these things we need to sort of develop now. Our young scientists, particularly, if we start focusing on during pandemic, anyway, there's no lab work. You're all locked in at home. This is the time to talk about history and philosophy of science, build hypotheses and how to construct theories, how to design an experiment for falsification. We should not try to, more young scientists keep saying that I will prove this using my experiment. In science, you don't prove anything, right? You either falsify or you validate. Or how to enhance objectivity in data analysis, because very often correlations are used as causal relationship. So, correlations and causality has to be clearly separated. Research ethics, another area which, we need to improve. The, statistics, all our students and young scientists have to improve, including us, of course. I'm a very poor statistician. Now, what is that you can do together is, because we are also in the time when online world is digital world is so, prevalent. And so best thing is to sort of start journal clubs, right? You don't have to stop all of these things. Your lab meetings, you don't have to stop. Journal clubs, you don't have to start. You continue to do all of these things. Because what is lockdown? Lockdown is all about physical distancing, we are using the word social distancing, which is actually a wrong thing. It's actually physical distancing, but you should not stop our social interaction, because social interactions can still happen online, like our webinar today, right? So that's my sort of response to your question.
Yeah. Thank you, Sasi. In fact, your views will certainly give some more clues to the scientists and science managers. Now, coming back to the lockdown, when it is again extended for 2 more weeks, as you know that there are limitations on what can be done at home using internet. How can scientific research be continued through these days of physical distancing, as you said?
So again, I already mentioned, right? You can do many things online. Thinking about science, thinking about what science you want to do, thinking about details of experimental design, and thinking about all the data that's already there, on the public domains, and then I'd start doing the meta-analysis of all the data that's available. Whether it is a particle physicist or a cancer biologist, right, or a chemist, there is enough data to analyze. It could be your own data, but it could be data from from others. Very often, because of the lockdown, most of the work maybe is incomplete. To take it to a full story, this is the best time to sort of step aside and start thinking what is that we can do. Right now, coming to one more thing we could do. This is also time to improve our collaborations. One of the things, most of us are bad at. In India, collaboration still not as prevalent as elsewhere in the world. Right? Science cannot be done in isolation. Earlier days, or people used to do science, but there are once in a century you can get a good scientist, right? It would be Kepler or Galileo or someone. But modern science is all about collaborative research, right? We actually directly collaborate or not, we're actually collaborating. Peer review is a collaborative process, right? And we put up all our papers and data online, and someone else can actually use that for their work, right? That's also collaboration. But actually, real-time active collaboration, we need to encourage both national and international. And that's also time, which helps our better external validation. And these are some of the main features of modern research enterprise, and they should practice now. Right? This is the time to practice some of these things. Now, coming to again coronavirus, this pandemic, novel coronavirus, I should use the word novel coronavirus, is a technically correct term, right? Of course, there is a very long, ACRS-CoV-2 is another, technical nomenclature, but I'll use the word novel coronavirus, which keep hearing in our mobile phones all the time, right? What is that we can do? It's not lockdown. It's only for non-essential thing. Tomorrow, let's say you have an idea to work on novel coronavirus and the disease COVID-19. It could be a physicist or a mathematician or a computer scientist or a biologist or a biomedical researcher. You can always do something interesting if you have an idea, and through a collaborative method, national, international, and you can get your lab open. I mean, that's completely allowed, right? Now, and what are the different things we can do is only when we work together, right? One of the questions public is asking, that's where we scientists have the responsibility. The questions public is asking, is this virus going to stop us from doing anything in future? Is it the end of the world? Is it the end of the humanity, right? And assuming that humanity and the world is synonymous, and people say that if we are not going to eliminate all of us, or what is going to happen, or are the nations going to collapse, right? So all kinds of fear is being thrown in social media. So everybody is saying that this virus is going to stop us, right? And scientists, can we stop it, right? This is what we need to ask the question, and we need to showcase that we can do it, and we can do it only when we do it together, right? Now, already, as I told you, within days of appearance of the symptoms, scientists discovered which virus, how it infects human, how it spreads, right? And what is the difference between very different stages of infection, what happens in the physiology of the human. And also all of these things have helped in better strategies of testing, isolation, quarantine, contact tracing, a variety of different things what we're doing in every city in this country, right? And you can also plan in at least few days or few weeks in advance, how to increase our preparedness, right? And all of this is possible because people collaborate and work and share the data freely. Some can work at home using computers, some can actually need to go to the lab and work together, right? So there's a lot of things one can do even during the lockdown.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor Sasi, for your very inspiring views. Now, I would like to ask you, as a scientist, how do you see life post-lockdown and post-corona? How optimistic are you that the scientists will come out with a vaccine of SARS-CoV-2 within the next few months?
So how do I see the world? As I told you, not just as a scientist, someone who is deeply interested in the history and the societal dynamics, and I see that not going to be much difference. We're going to forget very quickly. We have forgotten many calamities earlier, and life would be as usual after a few months. Once we have vaccine or something, so that we are not worried about getting infected. To some extent, but the social scientists and anthropologists are better to explain than me. I don't want to venture into it. How will be social interactions in later, because everybody is doubting others, whether someone is carrying the virus, should we interact closely or not, right? How will be that will shape up our societies, but that again will be very temporary, to some extent. All of those things will be temporary, uh, but what I hope, rather than what I think, is there will not be any change. We're going to start emitting carbon to the same level as we were before. Is people will sort of understand that there has been a problem of the climate change and deforestation, and which is causing more and more diseases. And earlier, diseases were sort of localized to one or two places; they were not spreading so much. And now it has become a pandemic. And hopefully, we'll have a better understanding, not just among the scientists, among the policymakers and general public. And there will be more emphasis on mitigating the climate change and improving the forest coverage, right? And that what I hope, and that's also, we scientists, is our responsibility to increase awareness among the public about the impact of climate change and deforestation and more human wildlife conflict leading to new pandemics. And hopefully there will be more emphasis on this, and more importance will be given by all countries. Now, coming to the virus thing, which for me is just a matter of time rather than whether we'll have a vaccine or not, right? Look at what's happening, unprecedented. So typically earlier days, a drug or a vaccine would be worked by one or two companies or one or two labs, and then each one will try something. And because by the clinical trial and all is so expensive, and not everybody will venture into their lead molecules or proteins or antigens to be a vaccine, or if it's a small molecule as a drug. So it was a slow process. And this current pandemic, the large number of experiments are going on in parallel, right? So according to WHO, as of 20th April, close to about 100 labs are working on vaccines, right? And each one is trying something different, right? And some are funded by the government, some are funded by philanthropists, and few by some commercial organization. Now, it's if you have 100 candidate for vaccines, right? It's unlikely that we will not have vaccine in another year or two. It's simply because the viral genome is only 30 kb, and there are only a fewer proteins that these virus can make and put it on its envelope. And we also know, by basic scientists have understood a lot about the structure of these proteins and what kind of mutations will change the structure to an extent that the virus becomes destabilized, and what kind of mutations are tolerated by the virus, right, so that it can form a solid structure. Now, those are the mutations are one we have to worry about, because they still cause the disease, but they may not be recognized by our antibodies. So all of these things people have used modern data science like artificial intelligence and then modern synthetic biology approaches to actually start working on the vaccine candidate on the virus, but forms of virus which do not have even exist today. Even among the novel coronavirus, there may be new variants that may emerge later. People are already working on the vaccines against those variants which have not even evolved yet, right? So my guess is it's just a matter of year, or let's say maximum 2 years. It could careful, cautious, maintain some physical distancing, but not social distancing again. And we have to have confidence. The public should have the confidence in scientific methods. And that's the key for the success, because all kinds of myths and hoaxes are being spread in the name of this therapy, that therapy, or unsubstantiated therapy or treatment. Even some scientists many times mention, but they should not become a big news for public. Those are all within the scientific domain where people peer review each other's work, and only when it's validated becomes a real science. So that's I'm very hopeful, I'm not confident rather than hopeful, that a vaccine is almost there.
Thank you, Sasi. In fact, I am sure your knowledge will enhance the understanding of our viewers. Now we will take questions from our viewers. We will try our level best to address maximum questions allowed by the time frame.
But before that, I think I should again, thanks for this opportunity. Of course, I'll again thank everybody after the question answer session. But it's very important that you started this webinar series, and I thank INSA and INYAS. And thanks for all those interesting questions, so that I got an opportunity to express my thoughts.
Thank you. So first question is from Professor Chandrama Saha, President INSA. And the question is, to reduce the rate of transmission of SARS-CoV-2 virus and also continue with precautions after the lockdown ends, society needs to believe in science and the scientists. How do we augment the public sense of trust on the scientific enterprises? How do we reach to the people who are normally not interested in scientific thoughts, but needs to be communicated with right now?
It's interesting. Almost anybody who is somewhat educated, even our uneducated people, they keep asking when is the curve getting flattened?
Right.
So some people are already picked up the some technical words, right? So I think it's not a big science to explain. The problem is it's for general public, something which is not seen, something which is not visible, is difficult to realize what it means, right? A virus is something which why do we have to worry about there is not a single case in my town, and why should I still maintain physical distancing or wear mask kind of thing? I think it's better. There are simple ways of explaining this. There are a large number of artists and computer scientists and biologists have come together, made lots of interesting cartoons and simulations to explain to general public. And we should use all our students, all our young scientists, and all, of course, seniors, all scientists, nothing like young versus senior, and particularly school and undergraduate teachers. We have a larger number of that one, so that we can actually take the science of this coronavirus, novel coronavirus, to every corner of this country, so that more and more people are aware of why we had to maintain the physical distance, why we have to wear the mask. That's all. These things can be explained very in a simple way.
Yeah, thank you, Sasi. Next question is from Central University of Punjab, Dr. Vinod Pathania. He is asking, is it possible to find whether COVID-19 is man-made or natural? How difficult is it to find it?
Oh, wow. So,
yeah.
It's not that difficult. And, that's what all biologists, particularly evolutionary biologists, do what is known as phylogenetic analysis. They compare these sequences to the sequences of other species and then see, how they are evolved, right? So it's almost proven beyond doubt now that it's actually a natural origin. There are no, question about that. The question now people are asking is it an accidental release, or is actually naturally, sort of transmitted from an animal to human because of some social interaction and human wildlife conflict happened, right? Whether it, dealing with a wet market, or, people actually, in the forest picked it up, or it's actually in the lab is somehow accidentally released. I don't want to, be a judgmental on these things. I don't know the details, but what I really try to tell the people is this is not something, once we know it is not artificially designed one, it's a natural origin, people should actually, have trust in humanity, that accident can happen anywhere, even if it is by accident, and something can happen. For example, in early or late 19th century, there was a big cholera outbreak in London. It's simply because there was a mixing of the drinking water supply and the sewerage supply line. And many people got cholera and got killed. I mean, it could be simply an accidental thing, which, it happened, when many such diseases have happened earlier also because of some accidental reasons.
Thank you. So the next question is by Prahlad Seth. He's asking that, can host adapt, that is change its biology to combat COVID-19?
So the host can adapt. Obviously, in the evolutionary terms, yes, hosts always adapt, but population level it happens, right? But it won't happen in our own lifetime, because adaptation is a process in where generation to generation happens, right? So for example, what happens is we have a, let's say, genetic diversity. There's huge genetic diversity in human population. We have 7 billion people, and we already know that large number of them will become asymptomatic, right? Even if they get the virus, that means we already have certain way of protecting ourselves. Why we are asymptomatic? Still some research needs to be done. If there is no medicine, modern medicine, and more people who survive would be the ones who are asymptomatic, the people who get infected will die. Then the next generation will have mostly the people who are resistant, adapted to the the pathogen. So then that's how the natural selection happens and the evolution progresses. Because in the modern medical terminology, we are in the medical world, and we're going to intervene with the viral infection and try to protect everybody, right? Then this is somewhat slowed down, right? Our adaptation to this virus can happen only when we develop new variations, and that will take its own time. Human generation, already told you, it takes 35 to 40 years to, generate some new variation in the population.
Yeah, thank you, Sasi. Next question is from Sonali. She is asking how artificial intelligence and machine learning can play the role to find the vaccine for COVID-19.
Oh, it's already being used. I mean, extensively. I told you already, for the vaccine production. In fact, there are varied permutation combinations. There'll be variations in the protein, in the sequence, and which protein, particularly the protein which is on the surface of the virus, right? And using artificial intelligence and the machine learning, people have actually looked at variety of different combinations of these, proteins, can be present on the viral surface, and which one may become an epitope for antibody production. So it's there. And also the current method of identifying the transmission, how the curve would look like, how to make projections, and particularly, each country, each region has different way of social interactions. And given the cultural, differences in social interaction, how the virus is spread in a population, right, is all being sort of looked into using the AI and ML methods. All our predictions are also involve AI and ML.
Thank you, Professor Sasi. Now there is a question from Dr. Salini Rajkumar from Nirma University, Ahmedabad. She's asking that the ongoing lockdown needs to be released one day. How well do you think Indians are poised to develop herd immunity from evolution or genetic point of view?
So, if an immunologist better to answer this. I'm not be able to answer all aspects of this. But whatever I heard is, to some extent, considering that so many of the positives are so asymptomatic, there is a variation can be somewhere between 80 to 95%, right? In that range, people are asymptomatic. That means, they already are not necessarily immune. Immune is different. Basically, the virus is not being able to cause the disease in those individuals, even if they don't have, in the beginning, antibodies against this virus. You can't have antibodies against the virus which has not seen before, right? So we don't know what's the method, finally herd immunity will develop, or when it will develop. My guess is the lockdown will be need to be relaxed somewhat more cautiously, in a stepwise way, rather than just lifting the lockdown in one step. And slowly, more and more people become, infected, or a large number of them are asymptomatic. Some will develop, immunity, and overall, the population would be normal, and with vaccination added, and then hopefully the year or so will be, completely protected against this virus.
Yeah, thank you, Shashi. Due to the time limit, we cannot accommodate all the questions.
So I'm so sorry. I think I sort of went a bit 10 minutes longer than I thought I would.
Yeah. So I'm taking the last question. This one is from the student. She is asking, okay, now hiring is freezed everywhere in US, Europe, and mostly our PhD student, they look for postdoc opportunities. So what is their future now?
No, it's the same thing everywhere, right? What I kept saying that it's only a pause. It's not a stop, right? And it's a short pause. It's going to be only for a few months. Life will continue, needs to be continued. And particularly because there is so much confidence in science, the way this pandemic is handled, right? So all governments, all countries have realized that we need to invest in science, particularly basic science and biomedical research. And I don't think there would be any problem. Best thing is to make best use of this time, reading more, and keeping healthy, and then wait for the time when the job opportunities open up. And also, there is a strong will for survival, and every society wants to do something differently, and something, so that they don't want to sort of give up. And what we need to worry so much now is to how to revive the economy, how to recover the jobs of the poor people. And that also where scientists can come forward and explain what are the different ways, construction work or any other type of farming where intense labors are involved, and how do you improve their health and still they get jobs, right? And that's where some of us can actually contribute.
Thank you, Professor Shashidhara. In fact, there is a further request to take one more question. So the question is by Krishna Murari, and he asked that funding paradigms are going to be different from now on. How can a virology scientists help in the field of virology? Also, would they be provided funding without expertise?
No, see, even if not a virologist, see, biology is just one big continuous continuum, right? And you may be a molecular biologist, you're a structural biologist, you're not necessarily any particular branded biologist, right? Whether a virology or bacteriologist or a plant biology or animal biology or anything. So there is a enormous work one can do as a structural biologist or a biochemist, right? As a developmental biologist or a cell biologist, right? There are so many things, to be discovered, not only in the context of this pandemic, in the context of any disease, right? So there is scope for everybody to work. The reason, again, I want to highlight is we need to formulate our idea well. We need to ensure that our methodology is comprehensive. It sort of takes into account all possible lacunae, all possible ways in which an experiment may fail or may actually give wrong results. These are the things which one has to worry about. I think the funding will come. People have to apply for grants. There will be more grant applications for sure after this or during this pandemic or after this one. My guess is research will actually flourish, and they will actually expand in much more multiple different ways in all branches of science. I'm not talking about only biology here. It's true for physics and chemistry too.
Yes, last question. What is the herd immunity?
Say it again.
What is the herd immunity?
Okay, you should bring another speaker for on the as an immunologist on this, this webinar, because whatever I say won't be scientifically correct, perhaps. You know, I have my own understanding of what is herd immunity. I would leave that question to the next speaker, hopefully.
Thank you, Professor Shashidhara. So now we are over from the question side. So I would say that on behalf of INYAS colleagues and on my own behalf, I wish to thank you, Professor Sashi, for joining us today to express your views on various aspects of COVID-19, its impact on general public and on scientists in particular, and the course corrections we all might have to do to deal with the post-corona era. I'm sure post-corona life will be different, and you mentioned that we are the product of 3.8 billion years of evolution with full of many known and unknown such pandemics. I am hopeful the Homo sapiens will also evolve out of ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Going by Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, fittest have been survived, and so will be
No. Good. Darwin never said that one. There's nothing like fittest survival. The one which adapts well will survive.
Okay.
Fittest is the wrong meaning in the society. That means
Right.
you have to be strong. Nothing, nothing of that kind.
Correct. Thank you for
this. It's given time and space, who adapts well.
right. Thank you for your clarification. So I say that so will be the case in the post-COVID-19 era. I am sure all our viewers will be benefited by this wonderful talk. I thank all the viewers for tuning in to INYAS YouTube channel to listen first talk of INSA-INYAS webinar series, Vigyan Setu. Friends, at the end, let me mention that Professor Ashutosh Sharma, Secretary DST, will be our next speaker. We will meet again on 12th May at 11 a.m. Please note the time and date, 12th May at 11 a.m. Take care, stay home, stay safe, and stay fit. Goodbye.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, and I would like to thank INSA and INYAS for starting this wonderful series. Yeah, thank you. Bye. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Shashi. Thank you, INYAS.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Chandrima Saha, for joining us. Yeah, thank you for this wonderful start. Thank you.